Welcome to the Children's Tradition Podcast, where we introduce families to the poetic life. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Foss. I'm here with my wife, Amanda Foss, and we are really excited to be able to talk with a special guest here today, Mrs. Annie Crawford. She's a cultural apologist, a classical educator, a homeschooling mom, and a wife. And this is something I know we have been really looking forward to talking to. So, Mrs. Annie Crawford, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am also very much looking forward to talking with y'all.
Well, as we chatted before we started the recording here, I mentioned we sort of stalk you on X, and I know, so anytime you sort of post something, I see it and I go, okay, and I'll send it to Amanda. I'll be like, hey, look at what Annie, look at something she highlighted, because I know you do like a lot of kind of cultural commentary, especially with a symbolic lens and filter. And I'll be like, Amanda, look at what she said today. And then I'm the type of person, I'm a verbal processor. So then I'm like, hey, a lot of times our coffee mornings are over one of your posts that we end up just kind of breaking it down and applying it. So thank you. You, like I said, your topics have influenced our coffee mornings.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That makes my day. I do try to use X for good, right? It's good for provocative clarity, right? And if we can provoke good conversations, then I feel like I haven't wasted all my time there.
Right. Is that something you've always kind of been doing? Is it more, because obviously I kind of became more familiar with your work in the past couple of years, but is that more of a recent development for you to kind of just get more involved in that sphere?
Yeah, I think I wasn't on X at all until a year and a half ago. And some of it was just as I was working towards writing and speaking a little bit more. You know, people will encourage you to have a social media presence because that's how you build an audience and network and just support, you know, whatever general movement you're trying to help support and build. Those social media outlets do have their role, right? And then it's playing around with how do we use these different technologies well. You know, if you're not ever playing around with it, then you're not experiencing the temptations, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so working in the realm of cultural apologetics or faith and culture, I do think it's important for me to have a finger on the pulse of culture and sensing what's going on. And so I found X to be, you know, it's addictive. That's the main struggle, I think, is that it can be very addictive and suck you in. It can also be I've really had some great conversations and been able to connect with some really interesting, beautiful, meaningful people that I've learned from. So it's an interesting place, but yeah, I've only been on there about a year and a half.
So we initially, I think, found your work through Symbolic World. You had done some interviews with Jonathan Peugeot, and we just so enjoyed the conversations you had with him. So I think that's often how we think of you, like you said, as like this cultural commentator who can talk about symbolism and how that flows. But you're also a mom. You homeschooled your I think it's 2 daughters, right? Three daughters. And so we would just love to know more about your background as an educator, your experience with homeschooling and the classical education movement at large.
Yes. And my interest in cultural apologetics and cultural work really comes out of the educational, as we realize so many of us in the older generations lost out on important educational formation because of, you know, the modern experiment going on in the public schools. And so it was through, you know, homeschooling and renewing my own education with my girls that I wanted to find ways to expand that work to others in the church and the broader community. So, but to answer your question, you know, how did I get interested in education, start in education? I can't remember a time where I wasn't involved in education in some way or another. My mom jokes that, you know, when I was like 6 years old, if a friend was coming over, I would set up, you know, a table and some homework so that we could play school when my friend came over. I just, you know, intuitively for me to be alive was to want to learn, you know, to see things and want to understand them. I've just always loved learning. And then, you know, being somewhat social and verbal, sharing what it was, I was excited to be learning with others. So growing up, I was often serving as a tutor in some class. I'm an equestrian, and I would often help give riding lessons to other people. In college, I just wanted to learn. So I took 6 years to get through my undergraduate because I I couldn't, I wanted to learn philosophy. I wanted to learn literature. For a while, I thought I would learn physics. And then I took one real physics class and realized that the gifting was not there. So I majored in philosophy, minored in literature, and got a double major in the end, strangely, in outdoor education. Because I think, looking back, I was just trying to figure out how to fit together the life of the mind. I loved to learn about ideas, but I also loved nature. And as an equestrian and a hiker and a backpacker, I also loved this, intuitively was drawn to nature. And so I think I was just trying to pursue both and then find in outdoor education maybe a way that I could fit them together. But I ended up getting married right out of college, moving to Texas, and getting pregnant right away. And so after graduating and having a baby, it was just very natural for me to think, okay, well, now I'm raising this baby, and my love of learning and sharing what I learn is going to be oriented toward my own family. I'm going to learn how to be a mom and learn how to raise this child the best I can and the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so, as a homeschooling mom, I learned as much as I could with my girls and tried to share that with my community, partner with, build an educational community around me. And, as we learned, move into more and more formal roles, as I learned and grew and more opportunities opened up to me, I would help teach literature or philosophy for high schoolers at co-ops, even when my girls were little, because I had that background. The moms would often ask, well, I don't know how to teach, Jane Austen or Plato. Will you teach the high school kids? So I often got put teaching the older kids, even when my girls were little. And then a little in 2016, kind of felt the opportunity and inclination and encouragement to go back to school and get my master's degree. I got a master's in cultural apologetics, which is kind of an unusual category, which I feel like fits me, right? This person who's often find myself in the middle, in between worlds, not quite falling in line or falling into those usual boxes. So cultural apologetics, this master's of arts, was really, I think, the best way to understand it, like a C.S. Lewis degree. We just read a lot of C.S. Lewis, a lot of Inklings, the Tolkien. We went through a whole core curriculum of ancients and medieval and modern great texts. And so what we find is that a lot of the graduates from this cultural apologetics MA end up in classical education, looking to Lewis and Tolkien as masters of the great books and doing what we can to then, share that education that Lewis and Tolkien had with others. So that's kind of how I got involved in education, was just this innate natural love of learning, an irrepressible desire to share that with others, and then, growing into more and more formal modes of work with my girls, with my family organically. And now that they are all graduated and, moving on to build their own families and do their own things, I've been looking for ways that I can take my love of learning and what I've learned and share that. I'm still teaching at our local co-op, but then also learn how to share that with others, help the church renew education. Education and discipleship really belong together. So we want education that disciples kids, and we want church ministry and discipleship that also renews our understanding of the world. So that's the season I'm in now, is finding different ways to teach the teachers, right? Encourage the teachers, which is one reason why I've been really excited to talk with you. So excited to discover your curriculum, the children's tradition. As I was telling y'all before we hit record, I have been aching for someone to help us heal the sort of bubbling divide that sometimes can exist between Charlotte Mason crowd and classical crowd. And I really feel like, when understood properly, the insights of Charlotte Mason fit with the classical renewal, and looking for resources to help young families better integrate those modes. And I just think what y'all are doing with the children's tradition is a really great resource, a really great model for understanding how the Best of Charlotte Mason poetic knowledge, living books really fits in with that classical tradition as well.
Oh, thank you that's a wonderful compliment. And, I think it's been interesting because the love that you have for symbolism, right? Which seems like this very like high level spiritual intellectual type of thought is rooted in capital R reality, which is the type of thing we need to know so we can properly teach our young children. And so it's very encouraging to me that someone like you who understands where we want to go, right? Because that's, of course, probably the main concern anyone would have with me writing a curriculum is that my oldest is 10 years old. So I have not finished this great path, this great journey of homeschooling my own children yet. I was homeschooled myself. So I bring that lens into it of having been homeschooled. But I think it's interesting that, I'm always grateful to hear from much more seasoned, experienced people who I respect, and especially then who can say, yeah, no, poetic knowledge, that is the thing, that is that missing piece that so often gets missed in those younger years when it is the most essential and really could give a foundation for the rest of life.
Yes. As I was reading through your curriculum, I just found myself saying, yes, 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 yes. I love, those are my favorite kind of books to read where you're like, oh, I wish I would have written this myself, but you've done it. So now I just get to celebrate without doing the work.
Well, really you're doing plenty of good work. So we all have our place on the front lines of this battle.
That's right. Yeah. But you're right that poetic knowledge is an essential key, right? Because what is modernism? I mean, one simple way to understand the modern era is the tearing apart of matter and spirit and this deformative dualism, right? We've got matter over here, mind or spirit over here. We don't know how they fit together anymore. And this has created the meaning crisis. What does my body even mean? What is a woman? This separation between body and meaning. And the key to bringing the worlds back together, the key to bringing body and spirit back together is that poetic understanding of the incarnation, how spirit is incarnated into the physical, how meaning is made manifest in body. That's what will heal the sicknesses of modernity, but it begins with that poetic intuition, that ability to see poetically the way that meaning is embodied in the world. And so just to affirm exactly what you're saying, exactly what you're doing, helping families know how to pursue poetic knowledge in those early years really is a missing key.
And so much of this is tied when we talk about modern man, right? That fragmentation really then is a loss of symbolism, because at the core of symbolism, right? It's being able to see things with analogous properties and all that's tied to that. So as you were talking about just really sort of your kind of formative years, particularly with education, and had really this orientation, which is really neat, how your soul was ordered in a way towards this spirit of inquiry. So I'm curious, even at a youthful age, I'd love to tie this into that kind of symbolic perspective. Was that there for you? How did you come to that? Or was that something later on? Because a lot of people may have sort of this bent towards education, but it can be, especially like I said, for modern sensibilities, it's pragmatic, it's efficiency based, it's utilitarian. So for you, was the symbolism always there in terms of the deeper realities to see things holistically? Or is that something that you would say kind of that you came to later on that developed?
That's a great question. And I do think that inclination toward poetic understanding and symbolism was there in a latent, intuitive way, not consciously. And I think some of that's because my mom is an artist. She was a professional jazz musician. She's very naturally artistic. And so I grew up with a mom that was very attuned to beauty, and really sought to, she loved Christmas, loved filling our home with meaningful beauty. The house was her artwork during Christmas. And she made sure that I had a lot of good books to read. So I had a little bookshelf full of, fairy tales and Narnia and just the good books to read. And then I think growing up in Oregon, such a beautiful place, that those three things sort of primed me intuitively this artistic mom, this musical household that I grew up in, a love of literature that I was given. I would just sit in my room and read, right? So reading good books, feeding my poetic imagination, even if I didn't understand it. And then this love of nature. I love to be in nature, to contemplate the ocean. And they just felt magical and alive to me growing up in Oregon. You know, I'll joke that the trees were my friends. So I think that was all intuitively there as a gift. And also, I think my mom's artistic sensibilities attracted her to an Anglican church. So starting around 8 years old, we went to a beautiful Anglican church with still the most beautiful liturgy I've been to of any church. It was a church that was all beautiful wood and river rock and incense every service. And we had, the priest would cantor the service well on pitch, you know, and candles everywhere. And so for me, again, growing up, I couldn't tell you this. I couldn't name it. I didn't understand it, but I was being fed this poetic understanding. This rich symbolic world was being given to me in terms of nature, in terms of art, in terms of liturgy. And it was just waiting for me to kind of come into the consciousness of maturity and sort of put those pieces together. Why did I love that? Why did this resonate with this? And I think it was I do want to comment, Patrick, on something you said, because a love of learning could be in our modern world so easily leveraged for pragmatism and ego. And I do think I was in danger of that because, you know, being kind of an introverted, sensitive child, like I struggled with the social dynamics. And so I very much sort of, you know, hid myself at the barn and in nature and in my academic work because I was good at learning and I could get A's. And that was in the academic achievement, that was a place that I could find kind of control and security. And so by the time I was graduating high school, you know, all I cared about was going to the best school that I could get into. I didn't even visit the schools I went to. I just, what's the best one and which one lets me in for the best price. And I go there without even visiting the school. But I think that God and his goodness quickly let me gag on my own ambition and ego. I very quickly couldn't handle just I was taking 21 credits, studying all the time. God just allowed me to run to the end of myself and for that to just be straw in my mouth very quickly so that I would turn back toward, I think the life of the spirit and seek my meaning there. So I do think it could have become an academic, the love of learning could have turned into something that was about climbing the ladder or about pragmatism or ambition or anything. But I really believe the Lord in his kindness to me put a hard stop on that. And then it was in my early 30s when my husband and I were, you know, kind of trying to figure out what our family life was and our family culture was. And we started going to a Presbyterian church because we just found that the Presbyterians did a good job appealing to the life of the mind, you know, teaching you theology, and they care about education, right? And so we were attracted to the Presbyterians because of their inclination toward, you know, right thinking and right theology. And this Presbyterian church happened to have a decent amount of liturgy. And our priest encouraged us to read Alexander Schmemann's For the Life of the World. And so that
Great book.
So good.
Great book.
Right. That book is, I think, that key that helped me start to see how all of this was going to fit together. Right. And don't you just love that? Because in the Eucharist, right, the very center of our life in Christ, understanding his body given for us as bread became this symbolic, sacramental, you know, incarnational linchpin by which then I could start to connect all the other pieces of my life and my heart and my understanding into then, you know, what feels like a coherent sacramental or symbolic view of the world.
It's life of the world is like a causeway, right?
Yes.
to get one from one island or one piece of land to the other. It's amazing as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about what a just beautiful soul your mother was, of this rich inheritance that she gave you, because so much of what I see with your work, your commentary, education, whatever it may be, there's such a pursuit of harmony with what you're saying, proportion and balance. And I think about how that was there. You received it from here, whether it's through creation, right? A natural general revelation, whether it's through maybe like a novelization, moral imagination from here. And that was forming your soul to already have this balance, right? Or to already have this desire for harmony. And then when you're reading things like Life of the World or other materials, that just becomes sort of the bridge or the tunnel that goes, okay, it's like there's like that extra puzzle piece that sort of allows me to see it now fully holistically, and just like it's like shining now. I can fully turn the lights on now, and now how I see how it all connects. And I think so much of your work, what I see, it's amazing through the inheritance of what we receive, particularly from our parents, right, and passing on from the culture, and we're so formed, right, from our atmosphere. I know Charlotte Mason talks about that, and how that really presses upon us how we see the shape and structure of the world.
Yeah, that's a beautiful insight. I do think you're right that her artistic sensibilities and that musical, I mean, Plato talks about in classical education, right? The importance of musical formation. I mean, yeah, so in a way, my story is very much what Plato is talking about, that the child's soul will be formed by these beautiful patterns so that when they rise up to the age of reason, they will welcome truth, right? As an old friend. Sorry, I'm tearing up because just
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Like God's world is beautiful. And the life that he has given us is beautiful. And the way that he works, that his grace works in us, even when we don't see it, right? Where you're like, oh, I was kind of a lost, lonely child, but still there was the Lord at work in these ways that bear fruit, right? Do not grow weary of doing good, for in due time we will bear the fruit, that harvest that he's promised us.
Well, and I love that you can look back and you can see how God used all those things for good. You know, it's so popular today to maybe look back at our inheritance or our parents, right? Or our whatever, the past generations, and look down upon them. Oh, they didn't do this for me. They didn't give us that. And yet something that I just really treasure is when we can, like exactly what you just modeled, look for the good. Yes, maybe we didn't receive every single thing we would have loved at a certain point, and yet we can see the good and call it good and thank God for it, for the beauty, truth, and goodness we received at each point. And then, like you said, even in different traditions, as you're getting to experience Christ in different places with different congregations, and yet it's going to have different flavors and different aspects, and yet to have eyes of love, to see the goodness there, to see the beauty that was given to you. I just think it's so important for all of us, especially our generation, to remember, like, to look for the good in each place. And something also stood out to me that you said about that for you, it was when you were with your husband and you're trying to think about the culture of your family and what that's going to look like. And I think that's a very common thing for many of us, is maybe, I know for us, we didn't necessarily think enough about the atmosphere and culture of our home until we already had our children. You know, I think, you know, in our youthful ignorance, we thought we kind of like knew what, you know, oh, well, we have the Bible and we go to church and we're good.
It was all didacticism, really, for us, as long as we have the moral imperatives, and for us, as long as we have the right formula of knowledge. Right. That itself.
Like we have our answers.
Yeah, that itself was going to be sufficient. But I think, again, tying to even just the parental dynamics of this with our family, it's like there's like kind of the old axiom, like in your 20s, you stand over your parents, you critique them. In your 30s, you start to go, hey, maybe things aren't as strictly black and white as I thought. And then you get to your 40s, you go, oh, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
And you know, but then you start to see, actually, you know what, you're able to filter through and say, hey, you know, it maybe wasn't ideal over here or this, but nevertheless, what they did give me, even if it maybe wasn't as healthy as maybe as a situation here or there, you can still appreciate what you did receive. And sort of, I view as my responsibility is to do better, not in the sense to compete against my parents, to say, oh, I beat you, but I owe it to them to do that.
Well, my mom always tells us, right? Stand on my shoulders, which I'm like, isn't that every parent? I now will already, and my daughter, our oldest is 10, but I will say to her, get ready to stand on our shoulders. Like that is the heart of love that a parent has, right? We want our children to continue. But I think sacramental atmosphere is a huge part of that, which is something that I know is a missing piece for us early on. And you often talk about how you want to help people recover a sacramental view of reality, right? Because that really is, if you want to talk about the atmosphere of a home, what makes it a Christ-centered, a logo-centered, environment, it's going to be through a sacramental view of reality. So could you just introduce everyone, if maybe they don't come from a theological background, that would be familiar with, sacraments or the Eucharist or all this, or a sacramental view of reality? What is it, and how is it relevant for families as we're raising our children, and how we think about that?
This is my favorite question to ask you. So I'm so excited. I'm just going to be like a little puppy dog. So.
Oh, awesome. Well, yes. Thank you for asking. So I think a simple way to move into understanding a sacramental worldview is just to define sacrament, which traditionally is defined as a visible sign of an invisible grace. So, the two main sacraments most traditions still recognize or practice is, baptism. So there's a visible sign. I see the water and I see the person going into the water or being covered by the water. So this visible sign that is showing us a visible or an invisible grace, the cleansing of the sinner through their identification with the death of Christ. So we have a visible sign that's showing to us an invisible reality. And that's what a sacrament is. And, I think it was through Schmeemann's work. It's hard. I can't quite pinpoint the moment that I realized that's how the whole world works. This whole world, all these visible things God has made to show us invisible spiritual truths about himself. So Psalm 19 tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. We're looking at the sky, we're looking at the star, and somehow that visible thing is an sign, a sign of this invisible reality, God's glory, his greatness, his power, right? Romans 1:20 tells us that God's invisible attributes, the spiritual truth about who God is so evident in the physical, visible things he's made that we are without excuse for rejecting, right, belief in our creator. Or as, it's Hopkins, the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins says, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. Or Elizabeth Barrett Browning, earth is crammed with heaven. Their earth, that symbol of physical, visible things, crammed with heaven, invisible meaning and presence. And every common bush afire with God. So I think that is the historic view of the church up until the modern era. I think that is the worldview of Scripture. That is the Christian way of seeing the world that has fallen apart during the modern era, for various reasons, which, we can talk about those if you want to. But I really think the moment we live in is needing to recover that sacramental worldview. Sometimes I'll use the word incarnational if we have more, low church Protestant types who get nervous. We're just talking about incarnation, the physical things having incarnational spiritual meaning in them. And another way to think of this is that God created the whole cosmos to be his work of art. So just as an artist creates a story that's full of meaning, or a painting that's full of meaning, so God made this world full of meaning. And it is our job to live in that world in harmony, in participatory harmony with the meaning of things. So that's, in short, a sacramental worldview. Remind me, where would you like to kind of unpack that a little further?
Well, yeah. So I guess when we're talking, I love here. So I love this point that creation has a language, right? And so there's patterns to reality, right? So, and I love how you bring up, obviously, the majority of our audience is going to come from some type of Christian tradition, Protestant, Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy. It's going to be one of those three. And so starting, I think, with that the premise and the foundation of baptism, the Eucharist, all of that. But I think there's even a broader sense of everyday life. We use symbols, right? For example, when we have a birthday party, we have candles and a cake. that's a symbol of something of celebration, right? We give gifts to show newness and mystery. Unraveling is the idea of new life coming into the world, all of that. We also just do that through basic traffic laws, right? We have signs, we have different things. We have signs that symbolize, right, a building of identification, all that. So that is just everything we do in reality. And so I think what I'd love to do is specifically even tie this. I think we'd be remiss if I didn't tie this to really the Christmas season, which is what we're in right now. So I'd love to know, how can that for us, because we can recognize it almost in these kind of other spheres here, but how does the Advent season, how does the festivities that we do, regardless of what tradition when you're within the Christian paradigm, how does that help us to recover this sacramental vision of reality and really form our imagination?
Let's break that down into a few pieces and talk more specifically. I do think it's helpful for many Christians to think in terms of general revelation and special revelation. Those categories tend to be somewhat familiar. So, in terms of general revelation, that God is revealing himself through the creation. And that's what we were talking about with Psalm 19 and Romans 1. And that is the foundation upon which then we build further meanings, or we experience meaning. So let's say God made, I like to use the example of trees. I was just meditating with my students one year on Psalm 1. They were memorizing Psalm 1, blessed is the righteous man. He's like a tree planted beside streams of waters, who does not wither, and in due season bears his fruit. God can tell us through scripture, through special revelation, what the righteous man is like, because he has created trees to have meaning, right? That a tree itself, the very structure and form of the tree, has meaning in it. The mature tree is strong. It doesn't move. You can kick that tree and you'll stub your toe. You feel that it doesn't move. And yet, even when it's hot, the leaves are still green. It has deep roots by which it is able to sustain itself through all kinds of storms and seasons. So the physical structures of that tree have meanings, poetic meanings, we could say, right? Poetic meanings of strength and endurance and stability, that's the meaning given to us through creation, through that poetic knowledge that we perceive in the created world. Then God is able to use that general revelation, the meaning of the tree, to start to teach us spiritual truths about righteousness, that we are to be like that tree with roots deep in the ground, right, of God's presence and his word, that will enable us to even bear fruit and flourish during dry seasons and not to fall over during the hard storms of life. We're planted, So that's some of what I'm talking about, this symbolic world that perceiving the meanings inherent in the forms of things is actually how language and meaning works, and is the necessary groundwork for us to understand, the gospel, the specially revealed truths of Scripture. The fact that that we can break bread and share bread, and that it nourishes our body and gives us energy, that symbolic meaning of the general revelation, of the created order, is what grounds and gives meaning to the Eucharist, where Christ becomes the bread of life. So in terms of, let's take that then to Advent. Okay, so we trying to create a picture of how this sacramental worldview is essential to a sacred imagination and the formation of a meaningful life for our children. Do I want to go there? I'll answer your question about Advent. So we see the ground of the meaning of creation as the foundation for our understanding. And so here we are in Advent, and we're watching the light get darker and darker and darker as the days grow shorter and shorter and shorter. And we're experiencing in our world, in the created order, a sense of growing darkness. And just because of how we're made as humans. We need light to work. So increasing darkness is going to feel like a decrease in life, right? A kind of dying. And also we look around and we see the plants losing their leaves. We see them cease from growth. We see the plants, some of the plants actually dying. We are experiencing this kind of slow death in our world. And yet there is this wild point. I mean, we take it for granted. Do y'all know Chesterton's, surely you've read Orthodoxy, and he says that part of the glory of a fairy tale is that in a fairy tale, the apples will be golden to remind us of the wonder that any apples are red, right? And so I think, we take it for granted that this growing darkness and this descent of death upon creation will turn. It doesn't have to turn. It could just stop. The days could get darker and darker and be in full darkness and stop. But wonder of wonders, there's a pivot point. And one day the day starts to grow longer again, and it starts to grow longer again. And we see all of creation turn back toward the light. And we see, the early plants start to bud and the cherry trees start to flower. And this death of creation gets turned and moved back toward life. And we experience that year after year after year. And so Advent. So the church saw in this created order, the symbolic meaning of the created order, something that revealed to us who Christ was and what he did when he came to earth. We were slowly dying in sin and death. We had unplugged ourselves from the presence of God like cut flowers, and we were on the verge of, the last leaf falling off the stem. But in the fullness of time, the light came to us, the one who is light, the one who is life. He broke into our world and he turned the world around. He turned the darkness back toward light, right? And then his kingdom, like a mustard seed, is growing into a great tree. So as we celebrate Advent, we are participating with our children in the meaning of the world, both the created order and the meaning of the created order, and then showing them how that prepares us for, right, the revelation of Christ, the revelation of the gospel. And in the celebration of Advent, in our participation of it, we are able to not only perceive that meaning, but sort of root it really deeply in our souls. I like Lewis's example, his metaphor in Mere Christianity, like a good infection. The more we practice the meaning of Advent, the meaning of this moment, the more that it soaks deeply into our souls and then becomes literally like the structure through which we see the world, right? We see the world through that lens of meaning. And that, I think, is what a sacred imagination is we think through metaphors. Y'all ever think about, someone might say, well, think of it in terms of this, right? One of the detriments of modern education is that we were trained to think of education in terms of computers and statistics and machines. Well, those are improper symbols or metaphors for what a human is, not actually a machine. I'm human. So when we think in terms of machine metaphors, then we deform our imagination so that we perceive the world in false, distorted ways. So a sacred imagination is to fill our mind, our imagination, with metaphors that are in harmony with the true meanings of the world. So I think, let's say the example of education, if I think in terms of gardening, if I fill my imagination with gardening metaphors, those will actually be more in harmony with the nature of the child and more helpful for me as I think about good ways to raise and nurture. Even the word nurture is a gardening metaphor, right? So if I think in terms of gardening, I'm going to have more of a sacred imagination in the way I think about education than if I think in terms or metaphors of machines. It's going to give me a profane imagination that distorts the way I perceive and understand education. So kind of to sum that all up, the Advent, the liturgical seasons, those sacred celebrations help train that sacred imagination, fill our mind with these strong and rich metaphors that allow us to perceive the world as it really is, in ways that harmonize with the real meaning of the world. And I think I've been meditating on this. I think that's part of what Christ means when he says, have eyes to see and ears to hear. That when my imagination is filled with true metaphors, then I have the meaningful structures, the symbolic structures I need to see things as they are. When I don't have those right metaphors, when I'm thinking in wrong terms, I can't see. I don't have the structures in my mind to perceive the world as it is.
Yeah, so in other words, because modern man's going to, for example, he sees the symbol and he sees it merely as a mere, right, construction, invention of where we apply the meaning based on how we feel about it or the value we extend to it. So it's very existential in that sense. So it's really arbitrary, where, in other words, a consistent symbolic view is we recognize this pattern of reality. We discern this pattern of reality. So really it's the essence of wisdom, right? That's Proverbs 2, cry out for destroy. Wisdom is how the house is built. So that's fundamentally the construction of reality. So you see it. And so then our job is to recognize the nature of those forms. So therefore we can participate in that reality consistently. And so, because then if we don't do that, if we don't do that, then we're living in a sense of disharmony with it. So we need to, in other words, I love what you're saying, acknowledge and recognize its nature. And therefore, if we acknowledge and recognize its very nature, therefore, then we can live in a proper way with it. And so it's funny, I think about this even with Christmas. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about a year ago. And he said, well, why can't we just have a mound of sand as sort of the image and decorate that?
For argument's sake.
For argument's sake, why does it have to be a tree? And sort of the way I said, well, the problem is you're assuming that meaning is arbitrary, and we apply it ourselves based, again, on our feelings or sort of our sentimental expressions towards it, rather than it's our perception of the form of where we derive our meaning. And that's exactly, and I think it's beauty for truth's sake. Of what Stratford Cowder talks about, that you have to recognize the nature of its form. And once you recognize the nature of its form, the meaning then comes out of that thing rather than me imposing upon it.
Right. As I was talking about the tree, that's why I'll try and help people. The structure of the tree communicates strength. I'm not imposing that meaning on the tree. It's literally strong, and then from those forms do give us meanings. And then as we perceive the ways those meanings resonate properly, right, our understanding of the world grows. But it does have to start with that recognition of the meaning being intrinsic. And that really, this really is where the modern world comes from. So many of us who trace intellectual history, start with William of Ockham as kind of a key intellectual figure in terms of the intellectual movement of modernity, because in nominalism, which has to do with nomen, the name, he is saying that things and names don't have any intrinsic connection. And then the modern world is drawn to that largely through the growth of the scientific revolution, which then, begins to give us phenomenal power over the world. And that inclines us to want toward a nominalistic take, because if I can deny the intrinsic meaning or values of things, then I am more free to manipulate them for the sake of experiment and power and control. And that's how the modern world really got sucked into this nominalism. And then it became the terms in which we imagined the world. And this is where you get all the language of it's nothing but, it's nothing but a clump of cells, or it's just, it's merely this. If you pay attention, you hear this language all the time. It's nothing but, or it's merely, or it's just, or it's only. That's all the language of nominalism, which is trying to separate the mere material, meaningless material from our purposes or our meanings that we want to give it as convenient. But the problem is that leads us into nihilism, the abolition of man, as C.S. Lewis describes, where we turn ourselves into mere meaningless matter. And now we have a meaning crisis. Young people, are depressed and anxious and suicidal because we've created a world in which we tell them that nothing matters. Nothing has intrinsic meaning. Nothing has intrinsic value. You have to make it up and impose it on the world for yourself. Well, that's exhausting. And so I really, I think that the educational renewal movement is at the heart of saving the world. Like that feels so hyperbolic, but it's just I see what I see, that this revival of poetic knowledge, the ability to see the intrinsic meaning and value in the world, is essential to then restoring a sense of our own sacred value and our own sacred meaning, so that we can see life as worth living, even when it's hard. Well, a hard life can still be full of meaning if we can tap into like the beauty and the goodness and the presence of God in the world, right? So yes, just to say, Patrick, I think, you're really at the heart of the issue, the crisis, and the answer when you're talking about the way everyone is so intuitively wants to see meaning as arbitrary.
So what is the role then, do you think, of the feast in that sacramental reality? Because I think maybe somebody could hear all this, and I feel like it's a common issue in modernity for Christians to feel a little timid about Christmas because of what the world can do with it. And so maybe there's a sense of which, maybe we shouldn't make as big a deal about Christmas. And obviously, like you said, in the Christian calendar, at the very least, we have Easter and Christmas as the two pinnacles of the church calendar. And yet it seems like there can be some timidity about that. So what is it about the feast that is essential and helpful in us feeding in this atmosphere of a sacramental reality for our families?
Yeah, I do think you've pinpoint a real problem of where good things have been commercialized, right? Commercialized or secularized. And so there's this intuitive, in the last 100 years, particularly in like more American, to withdraw from it. Yet I think the most important thing is for the church to celebrate the feast. That is the meaning of reality. What is our eschaton? What is the end that Revelation shows us? It's a wedding feast. All of this is leading up to the marriage, the full marriage of heaven and earth. God made this world so that he could form for himself a bride, a people who would dwell with him, right, in fellowship, in joyful fellowship forever. The meaning of life is that relation, is that feast. And how do we proclaim that truth of the gospel, right? That you were made for union with God. And the good news is that you threw that in sin. We threw that away, plunged ourselves into sin and death, tore ourselves away from God. And yet Christ came in the flesh, took on our flesh in order to restore us back into relationship with God so that we might dwell with him in fellowship forever. That's the meaning of life. It is essential that we show that meaning, embody that meaning for people in living ways. And this I think leads to, maybe we can tie this to that dualism. One thing I often think about in terms of family and parenting, one place that dualism sort of can sneak out is, all parents, we feel this. We want to tell our kids to do something we don't do, right? Put down your phone. Well, I like scrolling on my phone, right? Okay. And we all know that doesn't work, that we have been given incarnational lives, and that the real source of truth and meaning comes incarnationally through the way we live in our body. I can say, oh, I'm a nice person. But if I'm cruel and mean, I know that's what people will believe. This is why Marshall McLuhan, the famous media ecologist, has that axiom where he says, the medium is the message. And what he means is that the incarnational form is what really communicates to us. an example I give my students is I could be a preacher doing a great sermon on humility. I could have excellent exegesis. All the words could be very true and biblical words about the importance of humility. But if I am all glammed out and high on an elevated stage with, all these lights, shining on me, and I've got big diamond rings, is my body as a living work of art communicating humility? And what are people going to think I really value?
Yeah.
They're not going to think I really value humility when all of my way of living and being in the world is full of self-aggrandizement, right? That's what I'm really communicating. The mediums by which I'm living are the real message of my life. Now they're meant, word and sacrament, meaning and body are meant to be harmoniously together. I should both speak words of humility and live a style of humility as well. That harmony is what we were made for. Oh goodness. So how did I get here? Remind me.
Well, yeah. So we're talking about just like with having a sacramental view of reality, yes, what is the role of the feast in that? And so I think you're elaborating very helpfully. Just this idea that obviously all of reality was about the feast, the wedding feast.
So Christians can't say, if we proclaim in words that the gospel, the good news that God has come here to restore you to life and fellowship through the repentance of sins, but we don't live joyful lives, the gospel is not going to seem very meaningful and real, right? And I think that's why this next generation who's most affected, this Gen Z generation, by the meaning crisis, who are most desperately hungry for meaning, are very drawn to liturgical churches because they see them enacting the meaning of the gospel through the celebration of the feast, through, I see your beautiful icons, the restoration of sacred, meaningful art. And so while we don't want to fall into the commercialization of Christmas, because that actually begins to distort the meaning, we need to offer a proper feast. I think Christopher West, I don't know if y'all ever heard of Christopher West.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So he teaches John Paul II's Theology of the Body.
That's
which
familiar.
So that's a symbolic sacramental way of understanding human sexuality. And he gives this example of how our commercialized modern culture has moved, through the sexual revolution, moved into sexual excess and sexual indulgence. And so the temptation of the church is to respond by maybe being prude, maybe not talking about, don't watch anything with sex in it, this kind of prude withdrawal. And what Christopher West talks about is that, but we're sexual creatures. We have sexual hunger and we have sexual appetite, and that is a God-given thing. So frankly, if my choices are, you could think of the sexual revolution as kind of equivalent to our commercialized fast food. If it's McDonald's, and Dairy Queen, and that's sort of sexual indulgence, or it's nothing, most people are going to pick the Big Mac and the Frosty, right? Because we're hungry. And so what the church needs to offer is a proper feast, right? A roast goose and a home cooked mashed potatoes and a gourmet salad. We need to offer a feast because God made us hungry people. And so that's, I think, a proper analogy for understanding, let's say, Christmas. No, we don't want to indulge in an overly commercialized or secularized Christmas, but the answer is not just to withdraw. The answer is to recover and renew a properly joyful, meaningful, sacred celebration of the feast, because we were made for feasting. We were made for joy. We were made for fellowship. Very few of us can just live a kind of stoic, joyless life without falling apart. And so that's, I think, my best pitch for, as we are building the culture of our homes as homeschoolers, it's really important that, yes, we want to train our children in diligence and self-control and some of the aesthetic virtues, but we also want to show them that the life of Christ is a life of joy, and that God made good and beautiful things for us to have joy in them, right? So that we're offering them that sacred feast that is the antidote to, the fast food, junk food, that is our secular imitation of life.
And what you're advocating for is, you made the statement, we live incarnational lives. That's not arbitrary.
Yeah.
That's reality. So in other words, what you're saying is, live that consistently.
Yeah.
Right? Apply that faithfully.
That's
really what it is.
Because you're going to do something on December 25th, because you have a body. And so you will put it somewhere and you will do something with it on December 25th. And you can't get away from whatever you do with your body having meaning, either a kind of protest meaning or a slothful meaning, or how about give it a sacred meaning by pressing into, the meaning of the world that God has given us, the winter solstice. There's a reason Christmas is at the winter solstice, right? Because Christ is the light of the world, who comes to turn the light of the world. You're responding to that in one way or another, because you have a body, because what you do with your body will have meaning. You can't get away from that. I think that's such an important point, Patrick. And once you realize that, then you can start to be intentional with recovering the artful meaning of your life.
Hence why the tree means so much. A tree is such a central image and symbol in Scripture. It's there at the beginning, it's there in the middle, it's there at the end. And so, and the tree, particularly the evergreen tree, is a sign of life. It's a sign of, something that's growing. It's productive. When we refer to the sort of the dark winter, we always tend to describe things as by like a color, and we refer to it as what? The gray. The green, right? And then we add, more life, I should say, with ornaments and decorations. It's the symbolization, of something that's life and light all coming to one, which is what? The incarnation itself.
Well, and people are going to celebrate something, right? I think
that's inevitable.
I think the idea of the feast, like you said, this is, yes, in Christianity, we have the great feast of Easter. We have, in our church, we have 12 great feasts, but regardless, however many feasts in your church that you're doing, and we all, of course, share primarily in Easter, Christmas, it is this pinnacle that people celebrate. That is a human thing. People have feasts, people have parties. So what are we going to celebrate, right? And I think that the thing that I'm trying each year to do a little bit better is just to orient our celebration on the incarnation of Christ at this time of year, to help us feel in our bodies the waiting, and to feel in our bodies, though, the fulfillment of that waiting and the rejoicing that comes with it, so that on every physical and spiritual level, we're experiencing that great and high truth of the incarnation, which is so good. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I have to ask her this, because she does provide some cultural commentary, particularly around film and media. And I am a film lover. And as we conclude our time, I would be remiss if I did not ask you, okay, what would be one Christmas film? Because a lot of our families who watch, they're watching, go ahead. But I got to ask you this, what would be a Christmas film you would recommend? Because people are going to be watching them. That's what people do this time of year, that, hey, as much as it can, I understand, embody, hey, you know what? This film does a pretty good job embodying this kind of sacramental view of reality.
Oh, that's maybe too high of a
I'm sorry. I'm just saying, who kind of touches it even?
Now, I'm not going to say Die Hard, so I apologize to all the people.
Movie,
I've never seen it. So I do love film and do comment on film. I am pretty sensitive imaginatively, so I don't actually watch a ton of film, because I really experience film kind of as if it was happening to me personally. I think women tend to be that way, and I'm fairly sensitive. So, and for some reason, I don't know why our family we didn't watch Christmas films. So I had never seen It's a Wonderful Life until last year.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That is,
I'm
okay, so you're new to the party.
I'm new to the party. But I will just tell you what I do like to watch. We are going to watch the Muppets Christmas Carol.
We just watched that a few days ago with our kids.
Because I love the Christmas Carol. It's a fantastic Advent season story, for, so many reasons that would be a whole podcast on its own. And, they did a good job. It has whimsy, They honored the nature of the story.
It's charming. It's charming. It really is.
Everybody can watch and enjoy it. So, that's my go-to Christmas film right now. Although I love doing a Lord of the Rings marathon.
That's common this time of year. I mean, obviously they were released in that window too, but it does seem really appropriate.
I think because it, at the center of the Lord of the Rings is the Return of the King motif. And that does resonate with Advent, right? And so whenever we celebrate Advent, we remember that we are in a second Advent. Christ has come, but he's coming again. And we are still a people falling into darkness, desperately longing for the return of our King. And so I think that the Lord of the Rings, why a lot of people, one, you just have time to watch it, during the holidays, but I do think it resonates with that Advent longing, that the King would return. And when Frodo finally throws the ring in Mount Doom, that they do such a good job with the light imagery that the darkness is shattered and the light is returned. And so the movie really has those themes and beautiful, meaningful ways.
I love that. So I would just love to know, maybe you reflecting on motherhood, what were some of your favorite traditions or things you did at this time of year just to orient your family around the Advent and Christmas season?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because I do love some of the traditions that we've developed. I don't know if you were following me to come full circle to Twitter or X today, but I've been on a Santa Claus grumpy rant.
I did see that.
So one would be celebrating St. Nicholas Day, which, again, this was part of my, I'm discovering a sacramental view of the world. And leaning into the way that the liturgical calendar helps us participate in the meaning of the world. And so learning to celebrate feast days and realizing, St. Nicholas, his feast is on December 6th. And let's try celebrating St. Nicholas Day. That seems like an easy entry into practicing saints' days. And what I discovered is the way that it allowed my children, I think, to have the whimsy of the St. Nicholas legend, the Santa Claus legend, in a way that felt spiritually healthy, not pedantic, not Santa Claus isn't real, but actually let's participate in the real magic of Santa Claus. He was a real man, and he did love children and have a spirit of giving and care for children, and reading his story and then participating in that by hanging stockings and then by doing things that we ourselves to, in the spirit of St. Nicholas, give to others. But by moving all of those traditions to St. Nicholas, it opened up space to truly focus on Christ's Christmas morning. It's Christ's Mass. It is the coming of our King. It is the inbreaking of the light of the world. And when Christ comes, all things fade away, right? And I love that image at the end of Till We Have Faces, I was thinking about today, where I don't know, have y'all read Till You Have Faces?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So
Orwell finally opens up her heart to God and to Christ. And then she has this vision of him, Christ, the bridegroom, coming to her as this, she too finally, Psyche, she too beautiful and restored and ready to receive the presence of Christ. And she talks about how, before your face, all questions die away. You are the one we're longing for, right? Christmas morning should be an experience of that. And we need to clear, so putting St. Nicholas on St. Nicholas's Day gave us the fun, whimsical participation in that legend, but opened up space for Christ and Christ alone to be the light and the glory of that morning, right? And so one thing we did to embody that was, and my mom came up with this tradition, artsy, musical mom. So we all would have to stay in our bedrooms until we heard Handel's Alleluia chorus, like burst forth, top volume. So we're in our room and it's Christmas morning and we're so excited and we hear Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. And we come out and Mom had put candles, like we were up in the upper story. We had a 2-story house. And so you come out and then the stairs would go right to the tree. And she had set on every surface possible candles, 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 candles. And so it was just this experience of like the return of the King, right? This glorious coming of light that was so joyful. And then we would, and then we'd sit and open presents, but they were the gift of God himself, right? Given to us, right? So, excuse me. I just loved doing that with my kids. Like it's still, like even my adult girls are, they're like totally still on board with, we're not coming out until the Alleluia chorus. And, just then to, as a family, sit in your pajamas with your cup of coffee or your hot chocolate and just soak in the light, soak in the moment of finally, right? Our heart's desire coming to be with us is, that's the kind of meaningful participation that we're wanting to have as, again, kind of that linchpin, that anchor that then hopefully spreads more and more out to the rest of the year till finally we are fully abiding, right? Praying without ceasing, fully abiding in the meaningful world that the Lord has given us.
It's, it makes me think of Psalm 34:8, taste and see that the
Yes.
Lord is good. And in those moments, it's so much more tangible. Of course, we apply that generally throughout the year, but there's these unique times we set that aside to focus and right where we have not just like a definition, but it's a reality to absorb in our soul. And as we engage on this year by year thing, we want that to be a part of our soul.
Right.
So it's moved. And I saw that course where I think you said joy to the world. I think I saw it on your post this morning. I immediately said to Amanda, I said, I absolutely want to incorporate that. So that's going to be something that I know we'll be definitely doing and excited to take.
Yeah.
And, and one of the things that's been so clear, like I said, as somebody, both of us who've been following your work for some time, and like I said, really loved your imaginative framework of life. One of the things that's been, I think, most exciting for me dialoguing is how much you're moved by Christ. I think that is such a beautiful thing. Christ never gets old. Never gets old. It's always exciting to talk about because you always, what I find too, being a Christian now for about 15, 16 years, and really, I would say even growing in my faith, particularly these last 5, is you never stop making connections about Christ or reality.
That's right.
It's ever growing. It's always increasing. And I think Christmas really is so emblematic of that reality.
Ever further up and further in, right? And so through this logocentric sacramental way of understanding the world, who Christ is only ever grows and grows. I love that line that Lewis gives us in Prince Caspian, where Lucy meets him again and Lucy says, "Oh, I think you've grown bigger." And he's like, "No, my child, I grow bigger every year you grow bigger." As we learn and begin to see that he is the Logos in whom all things have their being, for whom all things exist, as our understanding of the world grows, then Christ, right? Our understanding of him grows as well. Yeah. And it really is, and we help build that out with our children by participating, in these patterns and showing them the way the patterns point to Christ. We are forming their imagination so they can see him as the one in whom all things hold together as well.
Well, Christmas is really it's a tradition about children, specifically the child, right? And I have found that the older we get, we kind of went through a moment where, when you're kids and then you kind of get older, I kind of became somewhat stoic about it. And then when we started to have children, we're blessed with six children, and you're sort of becoming alive again through it because you're really living it through them. And then, Lord willing, as we have grandchildren, that cycle continues, but your soul expands. Your capacity to appreciate it grows as you absorb it and partake of that feast.
That's right. Can I make one quick comment about the resistance, the concern about presents, right? Well, I don't want to make Christmas about money and getting stuff. And I think as you hear me describe how we do our Christmas, when those gifts are properly contextualized within the Christ-centered celebration, they aren't fighting against our attention. The feast, the joy is fueling our attention to Christ. Does that make sense?
Amen.
So I
Yeah,
think
it's a vehicle.
it's a vehicles, right? So for people who are a little, it's by putting things in their proper order, putting the celebration, putting, the good glass of wine, putting the presents, the gifts, in their proper place so that their meaning is aimed at Christ, then they serve the spiritual life rather than fight against it.
Amen.
Well, and I think so much of we can forget that, when I love that scripture that talks about how God knows our frame, that we are but dust. Like, yes, if we were the pinnacle of spirituality, just a moment of contemplation on the reality of the incarnation would be enough for us to feel, the joy of all joys.
If we were bodiless angels. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But we're not, right? And so even for a little child, everybody loves to get a present. You can't help but the night before.
And that doesn't change even for adults. Right. I still love to get a present.
Everybody loves a present. So to join, like you said, to marry that excitement that on a human level, people, you look forward to receiving a gift. If you know that when I wake up when I wake up tomorrow morning, there's going to be a gift for me underneath the tree. There's an excitement and anticipation there. And so we're training the body to essentially marry that material and immaterial spiritual joy at the same time. And then, now, yes, as an adult, it's not about do I enjoy getting a gift? Yes. But at the end of the day, there is, for me, I think it's the slowness of the season to get to actually contemplate the incarnation. I wish I was spiritual enough to appreciate the incarnation every day of the year, but Advent always shows up to me and as just a very timely, practice to be like, oh yeah, Christ is the light of the world. Oh yes, he became a man, and I need those reminders.
We need Christmas. We need it. We need that. We need that special, unique reminder, because if we didn't have it, we wouldn't appreciate it.
Right. I just love, Patrick. I'm sure we could talk for hours. By the way, y'all are just a delight. How you said, I have a body, so if I don't celebrate anything, what I'm saying about life is that there's nothing worth celebrating. I can't get away from participating in meaning. By trying to get away from it, I actually, with my life, with my body, say there is no meaning. There is nothing to celebrate. I think to give a voice to the devil's advocate, I think what I've heard people try to say is, oh, well, the meaning is on every Sunday, for example, or the meaning is, every time we have communion is the feast. And it's not that that's not true. Of course that's true. But I think it goes back to people celebrate something. We are made for celebration. We're made for feasting. And ultimately, yes, if we were spiritual enough, maybe Sundays alone would be enough. And yet we need more. And Christ in his grace has provided things like the great feast to orient us.
Mental affirmation is not enough. Yeah. You actually need to drink it. You need to taste it. The essence of Christianity, fundamentally, it is an embodied religion. Yeah. It is. It's an incarnational religion. It is
and
the
to
Logos
celebrate that, right? That we do not serve a Gnostic God. Thank God. Thank God we don't serve a Gnostic God.
No, it's so true.
Thank God.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, and it is true. We could talk to you for hours. I mean, it's such a delight to chat with you. Where can people just find more of just your work and kind of your commentary?
Oh, thanks for asking. So I do post on X a lot. Because I find it to be a fun place and a great place to connect. But I know not everyone likes. Thank you. Thanks for the encouragement. But I know not everyone, it is addictive. So I understand that not everyone wants to be there. So you can find me on Facebook where I try to be present, and I have a website, anniecrawford.net, where you can find things I've written, and I'll try to keep up with posting some of, the best conversations I've been able to have. So anniecrawford.net, or Annie Brownell Crawford on Facebook, or Annie L. Crawford on X.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to include those in the show notes below. So
yeah, I don't think we mentioned you write great articles too.
Yes.
You have stuff on gender and the space trilogy.
Yes, the gender and the cosmos. We'll just need to have you back on, okay, in the future. Yeah. Okay, so we'd love to. Well, thank you so much for our audience, and again, thank you, Annie, so much for coming on. We're so grateful you did.
Yeah, thank you so much.